My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Artificial intelligence is an incredibly powerful technology, and when it is harmful, those harms do not stay within borders. They hit all citizens equally. Because these harms are not nation-specific, neither should the legislation be. Very simple case that's going to help us take this debate from OG. Firstly, why is risk-based legislation good? Why do we have greater capacity to regulate on our side of the House? And why is coordinated regulation ultimately better? Firstly, why is risk-based legislation good? Firstly, I think AI can exist on both sides of the House, but and we'll get the legislation. But on our side of the House, we deliberately go in and try to regulate blanketly when it is harmful. What are these instances when AI is likely to be harmful? For examples. Firstly, on data leaks. AI has a lot of information about you, and if this ends up in the wrong hands, or if it is used by profit-greedy companies in an unofficial way, that is a violation of your privacy and potentially dangerous for you. Secondly, B, in cases of hacking. This can both be against individual people, but also against governments, which can cause harms to millions. The scale here is pretty elastic. C, when it is used to spread dangerous misinformation that can undermine democracies. Again, a harm that can hurt the entirety of the EU and not just a specific nation. And D, when there's immoral use of generative AI, something we've already seen incredible amounts of examples on with deepfakes, everything from political deepfakes to celebrity porn. Secondly, because this is a way that we get democratic sway over an incredibly powerful technology. The EU is ultimately a democratic body which all member states have opted into, and we should be able to regulate technology that is so powerful that it has the ability to not only violate your privacy, but literally take your image, make you say things that you would never say, potentially undermine your democracy. I will take you in a second. Okay, actually, yeah, no, go ahead.
Who specifically decides what is harmful and what means immoral use?
First, okay, I'm going to mention this in my greater capacity to regulate body. I think there are 4 structural reasons why we just get greater capacity to regulate AI, and the first one will engage with your POI. Firstly, I think the EU just has capacity to build a significantly stronger legislative body and regulatory body than these individual nations ever could. A, because they can assemble a significantly more competent team. These are all of the world leaders, representatives of all of these citizens, meeting up with experts. Some even like notice at the last summit at Bletchley Park, key leaders from these AI companies flew in to give talks about these things. They just have access to a greater talent pool, and they can regulate better. I think when you answer that POI, the question answer to that POI is the tops of the field, the representatives of the citizens, they're the ones who decide what is harmful. B, we just have greater synergy with other bodies in the EU. That's because the EU, like for example, the Commission, Competition Commissioner already keeps a close eye on these big tech developments, and they're used to regulating big tech. We saw this with the Google case when they regulated privacy. We've seen this with GDPR. These are 2 key examples that proves capacity. They have synergy with these international bodies that nation states do not in the same way. Because stuff like competition legislation is done not in the EU, it's not done nationally, fun fact. Secondly, we just have a greater size. AI companies are massive million-dollar techs. Businesses. They have huge, structural power compared to individual nation states because in many cases their economies are the same size. This means that they have larger economic sway over these nation states in order to bully them into doing what they want. The EU does not have this same problem because they're just comparatively larger. Again, incredibly intuitive point here. Thirdly, there's just general buy-in to EU bodies because A, all countries are used to implementing EU legislation. There's not going to be a burden here. The EU passes like 5 laws a week and all member states implement these. That's quite easy. There's not going to be like a huge hang-up on these things. There's no structural reason why there would be. There hadn't been for GDPR. There's bodies in every government that's used to doing this. B, we all opted into the EU, so countries generally have a positive view on what happens there. C, it's democratic because you voted on it. Fourthly, the EU just has a greater international overview in general. A, it has embassies in all key tech capitals, and it has the ability to summon people like Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk to testify before the EU courts in a way that smaller nation states like Denmark could never do, but even I don't think Germany or Serbia would ever even be capable of doing to the same degree. Sorry, I could only name one country in this room. B, they have a much better overview over these developments because they literally have feelers out everywhere seeing what's going on. What's the comparative here? The comparative in nation states works for 3 key reasons. A, they're smaller, they have less negotiation power. B, it's harder for them to keep this overview because guess what? Nation states are pretty busy with like national issues. That's why they're nation states. They don't have time time to do this, have a massive overview of all tech developments that's happened. So when they regulate, it's likely to be late and it's likely to be worse. C, there's just a mismatch in urgency. Maybe AI comes to Germany first, then Germany needs to regulate. Then it moves to Denmark because Germany regulated. And then you have to catch up the regulation again. We can do the same regulation once instead of doing it piecemeal in several different ways. Why then is coordinated regulation better? 3 structural reasons. Firstly, because it levels the playing field for companies. A, companies now doesn't have the incentive to move nation all the time, to go where there's the least regulation here, to go where there's the least regulation to do the cheapest and fastest R&D. This means they're now all forced to create safe AI from the get-go. The comparative, or like the intuition pump here, is tax havens. Instead of all companies just going over and fucking over the next nation who's easy enough to bully into being a tax haven, they're all forced to do this in a nice and democratic way they've opted into from the beginning. Secondly, because it is just easier to enforce here. A, because companies cannot move to like regulatory havens, but also B, because we can do these types of catch-all legislation. We can regulate broadly and ensure that we have blanket policies. You can't find individual loopholes. Note that some states would inevitably just have less capacity to do good legislation. I've already taken you to do good legislation, and this means that there is likely to be a mismatch between these things, which means that some citizens will inevitably be more fucked over than others. Thirdly, because we avoid the deregulation race to the bottom. I want to make it very clear that the comparative that they have to defend is that when some states will be desperate, will try to attract these companies, and this means that they'll all be forced to deregulate. Again, the comparative here is taxes. If there was no common agreements about how much we'd have in tax, everybody would try to have the lowest possible taxes, have the lowest possible regulations for minimal benefits. It's going to fuck over the citizens. The comparative here, thus, is clear. A, some states will have less capacity and thus worse legislation. And B, some states will just have bad or less democratic incentives, which will cause harms to these citizens. There'll be worse legislation on their side. The EU is better here because they do not have these individual selfish incentives. They still have economic incentives to want the general EU to do well, but this also means that they're interested in the welfare of all of them. They're directly beholden to each and every single one of EU citizens, which is most of you in this room, in a way which nation states does not have that over you. They're beholden to protect all of these citizens. Why is it crucial and why are we taking this debate? Firstly, because we prove we get safer AI, we get more democratic blanket legislation, we protect the most vulnerable citizens in countries with less capacity. So incredibly proud to be Prime Minister and stand on opening government.
To claim that the EU is not a selfish institution is the words of somebody who needs to step south of the Danube more often. The EU is an inherently selfish institution, beholden to Germany, France, and Western rich countries, and regulates in their favor. If you don't believe me, ask anybody from Greece or Ireland or Portugal in 2008, when they needed more inflation to save their own bloody economies, but the Germany made them default because they didn't want to devaluate the euro. This is the same thing that happens. The ability to create your own laws is integral to countries, especially poorer countries like Croatia, like Bulgaria, like Romania, to be able to influence their own economies and save their own skins when the West is keen on fucking them over. 3 key things that are going to be coming in opening opposition. 1, on how backlash is going to fuck over EU regulation, about both by companies and Eurosceptic countries. 2, how economic sovereignty is extremely important in this debate. And 3, how this is going to fuck EU companies and EU countries on an international and evolving AI market. Firstly, on the idea of backlash. Note at the point where the EU imposes regulations, in an era of high Euroscepticism, there is incentive for countries who are Eurosceptics and have a political bloc created around the idea of Euroscepticism to oppose regulation not based on the contents of the regulation, but based on the fact that the EU is trying to oppose something that they believe falls into the purview of their own national sovereignty. These countries like Hungary and Poland that oppose EU regulation at the point... Did you get clarification? Did you say clarification? Oh, no. This is countries like Poland and Hungary who oppose EU regulation at the point where they believe it falls their own national sovereignty. When OGs tell you, oh, but GDPR was implemented smoothly. No, it wasn't. It took 15 fucking years of GDPR regulation, push back and push forth, to get a weak fucking view of GDPR of like, oh, maybe cookies not bad. You know, it's not something that gets passed quickly, and it's not something that goes without pushback. What's likely to happen then is that Hungary is more likely to try to push against this kind of things, not because of the content, but because it is an EU regulation. Two, on the idea of like, oh, we're going to say this is problematic for data leaks or hacking, misinformation, and immoral use. Misinformation is usage-based. This means that you're banning any AI that could potentially misinform somebody, which is every single AI possibly in existence. You cannot ban the use of every single AI. You can only ban the idea of how it is made and what potential it has, right? Secondarily, when they say, oh, but data leaks, we already have GDPR, right? So I am unclear why GDPR is not able to control AI, but is able to control everything else in the idea of security of data, right? And lastly, on the idea of immoral use. The idea of morality of use of something highly depends on your own political opinions. I personally believe it is immoral to use AI to make naked Putin dance and shit. But that is my personal definition of morality, and no EU bureaucrat gets to tell me it's not. Closing, do you have anything smart? Okay. Moving on. No. Moving on then. At the point where you have EU regulation, you also have less incentive for countries to tangibly enforce this. Note, GDPR might pass, but at the point where you have big EU legislation getting passed, countries don't tangibly enforce them. If you've ever worked in a bigger company, you know that data is stored on USB sticks, stuck in drawers that nobody will ever open, right? To be a spy, you need a master key to a company and the janitor's closet broom, because data is thrown around everywhere. But this primarily happens at the point where countries don't have a national incentive to enforce this tangibly, or just above scraping by the barest minimum of EU regulation. And thirdly, companies are more likely to try to lobby the EU because they know that EU regulation is fucking terrible for them. The point where EU is likely to push for bigger and bigger punishments, they're more likely to try to make this regulation as weak as possible to avoid potential future fights, something that is not inversely true when Hungary, say, makes its own regulation. Secondarily, on the idea of economic sovereignty. Look, there are a lot of countries that are smaller and poorer. Those countries need to adjust the way that they have their laws to attract companies and businesses, because we do unfortunately live in a post-capitalistic hellscape, in a dream of Margaret Thatcher. But since we do, we still need to adapt to it, and countries need the ability to be able to attract companies. I do not oppose the idea of tax havens, because I would love Croatia to be a tax haven. I would love to be able to attract a company, make them work right here and not in Germany, because that gives me money. Fuck Germany, they already have money. Therefore, you need to be able, especially for smaller countries, need to be able to attract businesses. Why specifically? Because AI specifically has the ability to save you hundreds or thousands of hours of manpower in a single click. It's able to make people who are not technologically adept at using some things like programming or Excel or Word, they're able to do the job that they previously could not do. This is especially important for countries that don't have enough educated manpower to do jobs that Western industrialized, post-industrial countries can do. This also means that even more than just drawing AI companies into your territory, you need to be able to manage to use AI in a way that is important for your own economy. Note, Croatia has 1 billion small startup businesses that need to be able to use AI to make their business work, both in a domestic and an international market, right? At the point where countries know what the uses of AI within a country, e.g. Imagine Croatia has a lot of fields, and that they use AI as a software to help farmers know where their crop yields are going to be, or what crop rotations are supposed to be like, things like that. This is extremely important to your economy. At the point where some EU bureaucrat bans it, because Germany would like a bit more private safety, please, your people have to suffer. This is inherently problematic, one, on a principle level of sovereignty of nations, but two, on a tangible level, that people have to suffer because of uses of people unable to consider a holistic view, with no political incentive to consider a holistic view outside of the most richest people who go into this. No, you only took clarification. I'm not going to. Actually, closing. Do you have anything? Opening. Fine.
Nice to have a comeback at the Western European team, but on your side of the house, all citizens are put at risk by the bad or insufficient regulation by the least capable nation state.
I'm sorry if Croatia is least capable. I don't know what the harms of AI tangibly are. Maybe some data leaks. Data might leak on both sides of the house. Maybe somebody makes a deep fake of me from this video. Have fun at it. You know, I don't really care what the point is. Nobody's launching rockets. Nobody's doing bombs with this. I don't see what the big problem is. we have people more aware of the problems in the status quo, right? Doing this costs money. You have a lot of money that you need to enforce this. This is money that these countries don't have on enforcement, but also it's opportunity costs. People who are doing this are not solving tangible cyber crimes, tangible problems within an economy that they could be doing, meaning these countries are getting even more fucked because they're unable to keep up with other EU regulation. And lastly, EU countries need to be able to adapt to an evolving AI market that is international. To that extent, if you push this regulation on all EU countries, those who do want to break into the tech market, those who do have a lot of startups, are unable to have the first mover advantage, are unable to compete with US-based companies or China-based companies, and therefore stagger in the development of AI, meaning they're unable to save thousands or millions of hours of manpower for their own people, but also not able to profit off of God's honest hard labor because bureaucratic regulation is implied to all countries in carte blanche models, which has never been effective. For these reasons, proud to oppose.
I don't care what the leader of opposition thinks privacy is. I don't care what the individual that is not multiplied or proven to be on a systematic level, the ones that are most people off. I don't care what their individual sentiments are on side opening opposition. They have to prove this is in the interest of the average citizen across the EU. They have to prove that this is not just a sentiment from like one Croatian man. I think they have to do significantly more legwork. I think it is a straw man to say stuff like Germans want privacy, aka privacy. This is not analysis on how the EU works. It is also not how the info slide explains how this legislation is going to work. 5 systematic responses to opening opposition besides this like rhetorical framing. First of all, they tell us backlash from the anti-EU people. But note in their own framing beginningly, they say autonomy of states is very important. If that autonomy is so important, then that backlash is just an enactment of that autonomy, and that backlash in and of itself is not a negative. If that is to say then that we should care more about autonomy, if this is the tipping point for these people to leave the EU, fine. If that is the case, fine. I don't think that necessarily negates stuff on our side of the house. I think there's just a way for people to enact their autonomy in this sense. I don't think they managed to prove to us any of these things. But I think more specifically, I think a lot of narratives exist around AI. This is the best case I already dealt with. On the worst case, a more realistic case, a lot of narratives already exist around AI being harmful, being scary, being something we don't know where necessarily is going to be going in the future. That is specifically why I think we're more likely to opt into these kind of legislation in the first place, because we don't necessarily understand it. I think the average citizens feel very far away from the AI or like AI production that is coming out of big tech companies. Secondly, they tell us like banning whatever is immoral, blah, 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 blah. Banning is obviously the most extreme case. That is already in the info slide also. But note, we're talking about the AI that is specifically harmful, that is specifically risky to society. If you don't like our examples, obviously other examples exist that I couldn't think of in the 15 minutes of prep, but they probably exist given the info slide says that they probably exist, right? But thirdly, they tell us about lobbying and how this is like a weaker capacity to lobby these things, or it's easier for you to lobby things on an EU level. I think it's just not true either. I think it is significantly more easy for you to lobby one state or one ministry within that state rather than lobbying a huge EU corporation. Note that one of the core things for the EU in 2024 literally is AI. It is digitalization. It is ensuring that we do this in a safe and very robust manner. That is to say that the capacity for the EU to do these things due to all of the structural analysis reasons that Martha gave you that is unresponded to significantly outweigh the potential for some people to lobby. That is to say, even if lobbying budgets are up 200%, capacity is up 1,000% to do these things and resist that lobbying. I don't think they prove this either. Fourthly, they tell us businesses are relying on AI in the status quo.
fine, we're not banning ChatGPT, we're banning things that are significantly riskier. They need to do analysis as to why it is that the companies are relying on AI that is specifically harmful to its people. And if that is the case, then I would be happy for those companies to go bankrupt, for those companies to not exist, for those companies not to have access to exploit the people that they're trying to make profit off of. I think that is exploitative enough in and of itself. We shouldn't let these businesses exist, and I don't think they prove to us why it is that there's a huge delta on that then. I already told you, like, the Germans want privacy thing as a straw man. I think this is crucial, and I think all of opposition bents has to engage with this. What happens on their side of the house when legislation becomes necessary down the line? Even if it is not necessarily true in the status quo that Croatians want legislation on something, what happens then when legislation becomes incredibly important for them in the future? If it evolves to some extent that you are unable to necessarily say, actually we kind of see that this is kind of bad. Well, how capable are these states then to go in and legislate? I think even if it is true that we're over-guarding ourselves a little bit in the status quo, worst case coming out of OO, I think we're better equipped to dealing with the negatives in the future down the line. I don't know where AI is going to end. I don't think OP does. I hope the panel doesn't know either. Yes?
So in the Netherlands, there are different regulations for data and protection of gambling. Dus wie zei, for example, cannot buy CSGO cases and gamble on it. Why is it so hard to make these regulations of tech companies? You just assert it's hard, you never actually prove it.
No. We don't have to tell you it is, oh my God, the worst thing and necessarily impossible to do. We tell you it is significantly easier to do on the other side. This is a comparative debate. It is not one side doesn't give legislation, which is also, I think, weird out of opening opposition to say, we just don't want any legislation. I think it is easier for us to say the legislation that is going to come, that is likely given, I think this is a prefers, where do we prefer this legislation to occur debate. That legislation, we want to be better, we want it to be more equipped. On the reasons as to why it is that we get better legislation than on our side of the house, let's talk about Martha's case, again, unresponded to in large. Firstly, on capacity, we tell you that the bureaucratic system within the EU is for once doing us a favor because they for once have the ability to actually look at all the things that are necessarily in the interest of the people within the EU. They tell us, the EU is inherently selfish. We tell you, yes, but their selfish motives is to take care of EU citizens. That is completely different than one nation state that takes care of, like, Danish citizens, for instance, right? That means to say that we have so many things where we have spillover effects that help other European citizens to that extent. We have good capacity, we have access to talent pool, and we have synergies that are exploiting these systems in very positive ways in the first place. That is to say, because I think we give you an intuitive analysis on competition policies, because we really like the competition commissioner. She's Danish, really cool lady. Anyways, but those probably exist in other sides of the house as well. That is to say that when the EU has specific hubs within Silicon Valley, for instance, they're very closely connected to the tech companies when they emerge and when they exist. I can promise you that the Danish embassy doesn't have that sort of access to look abroad always, to always be the ones that are on the forefront, always checking out what is happening outside of their own borders, because they're busy doing things within their borders. But the EU is always looking at a comparative level. How do we have comparative power relative to other places in the world? How are we taking over things or ensuring and safeguarding ourselves against US, what's it called? US AI, etc., etc. So on synergies, on incentives, and on capacities, I think we do a good job on this. Martha tells you about the size of these things, but also, let me breathe, on the buy-in. You just responded, come on. Okay, fourthly then, on the international scope, I think we do a pretty good job here, but I think we also tell you very specifically here that the EU necessarily sees these things as being equal. It might be true that Croatia could benefit, and I think this is very comparative, right? Might be true that Croatia could benefit from being like a tax haven or an AI haven, but that is to say that that tax haven or AI haven might necessarily negatively impact other people in the world. It might necessarily lead to spillover effects outside of EU or within the EU where those people are also worse off. That then means that the autonomy and the ability to enact that autonomy becomes significantly worse on the opening opposition side as well. That is to say that the more we ensure that our borders are symmetric, the more we ensure that we have the same kind of policies within these borders, the more we take care of the people who live in these places. We do a pretty good job, I think, on proving why capacity is significantly larger on our side of the house, for the very reason that the EU cares about these people. That is the thing they are elected to do, because this is the primary thing that they care about, and they're significantly better at caring about it than local governments who always look internal first. That's why we prove capacity and incentive to do this in a much better way than opposition ever could. Very proud to propose. Nee.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119,
The case coming from opening opposition is really simple. We are trying to prove two things. The first one is that every individual country can make the best decisions for themselves. The second one is this harms the EU as a whole, but specifically harms small countries which are contingent on the artificial intelligence. So firstly, why is this unfair towards small countries? Because opening government says we are strawmanning them. We are telling you that they have two mechanisms as to why they claim this. Firstly, that countries opted into the European Union. Second one is that all laws within the European Union are passed and all countries adopt them in. We believe that there are three reasons as to why, even if countries opted in, majority of them did them because of the economic need. But currently, once they opted in, they felt that the pressure of France and Germany is big. There are three structural reasons as to why this is true and why France and Germany take over all other countries within the European Union. Firstly, simply you have more voting power, which means that insofar the seats within the parliament are delegated towards the number of people you have within your country, this means that France and Germany, as the biggest countries, have the most voting power. Secondly, they have the largest economies and they are the largest givers of aid and FDI within the European Union. They also give the largest amount of funds, which means that it is easy for them to literally bully other countries into doing what they like. This also means thirdly they have more lobbying power over bodies within the European Union, which in the end means that insofar laws are passed, every law primarily is targeted towards France and Germany, which we've seen, and Petar already tells you, in every economic case ever made, because insofar Balkan economy is different than France and Germany's economy, and France and Germany are dictating the monetary policy and all other economic policies, they're never going to be suited for the Balkans. Now, why is this awful? 4 reasons why, and this is impacting, so they don't say we strawman. Firstly, because you don't have the priorities of smaller states in mind, and know that smaller states are usually in the most dire positions within the European Union. Those are states with weak economy, those are states whose economies cannot stand so many regulations, and states that have issues with implementing regulations, and that's why they get fined. Secondly, in order for you to implement this, you need to have a lot of technology, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of people monitoring this within your individual state. Insofar, France and Germany, they have some of the most advanced universities, the biggest tech startups, and the biggest venture capitalism within their countries are able to do this. I'm positively and confidently claiming Croatia doesn't have the same thing. Now, what then happens? And what is the comparative opening government? Insofar, countries do actually accept this bill, and all countries opt into this, it is likely that this bill is going to be weak, thus it doesn't cover the impacts that they are trying to claim. Insofar this is strong, this means probably 2 things. The first one is the backlash that Petar tells you about. The second one is that countries are unable to implement this because this is so costly for their economy that the only thing you're going to have is them paying penalties. And this is already happening with multiple laws within the European Union, but countries cannot afford themselves to implement it, thus they have to pay penalties. Now, what is our comparative within this debate and why this beats opening government? The first one is, why are small countries good at doing this? The first one is you have more data and more information about the preferences of people within your own country. Insofar Croatia has 10 seats within the EU Parliament, we are unsure that the EU Parliament can actually represent Croatia. Insofar we have 180 politicians within our country that represent the entirety of 4 million people, we believe that they have more introspection. What they say is, oh, everyone values privacy. Germans and Croatians too. We are telling you this is not necessarily true. Why is that? Because when you're talking about priorities, you're here weighing economics versus data protection. The reason as to why people wouldn't support this bill is twofold. Firstly, because economy is more proximate to you. Insofar Croatia is having a booming tech industry led by Rimac, who you probably heard of. This means that people in Croatia are going to be really adverse towards this legislation. But secondly, it is just more tangible. Like, people opt out of privacy every single day. We are aware that TikTok is spying on us. Still, you have 3 million followers within Croatia, which means that insofar this is true, people don't care about privacy. Do you know which countries care about privacy? The countries that are rich enough to sit on their asses and think about, oh, privacy, is someone spying on me? People who have to work 2 jobs within the European Union don't have the time to think about privacy and to think about all the things and all the implications of this. But secondly, you have most information about your market and what suits your market the best. Insofar you're a small country that can afford to have tech startups, and you're not Germany or France, you know that insofar you shut down small tech startups or you regulate them to the point that it is too expensive for them to exist, this is going to impact your economy in a bad way. Insofar you have access to this information, you actually care about this information, you are the best one to make decisions for yourself. So what is the comparative here? The comparative isn't that you don't have any regulation. There are things that everyone cares about, such as hacking. No citizens wants to be hacked. We believe that in these situations, for example, hacking and deepfake, which don't necessarily damage the economy, but like citizens care about them, all countries have incentives incentives to crack down on them. But why they're efficient in this? Firstly, because these, like, the worst offenses are usually in the minority, and it is easier to build up infrastructure to target those. But secondly, insofar all countries are bothered by it, all countries within the European Union have the incentive to share technology. And maybe we have this type of EU legislation, which is like targeted at hacking or deepfake or something like that, not necessarily misinformation. But secondly, also note that like before that closing, do you have anything? Opening.
Okay, your case on small nations only work to prove that all cases they want this legislation. Other smaller nations, even if they're Western, are worse off on your side of the house because they have less capacity.
No, we are telling you that the smaller nations, aka Eastern European nations and like Poland and Hungary, etc., are in the worst position within the European Union. France and Germany are probably going to do this on both sides of the house because their citizens care, but small countries will not be able to do that, thus they will have to pay penalties. Now, secondly, on the question as to why they cannot just slightly regulate as opposed to ban. Firstly, because regulation of AI is difficult. I think Peter already tells you this. Insofar they want to regulate misinformation, and AI is fed out of data of people on the internet who are severely misinformed, you will never be able to target misinformation and slight offenses like that, which means that you either have to ban them, or insofar we are not able even to discover how AI works, I'm unsure of how they're able to regulate. But secondly, know that even if you regulate, we still win. Why? Because regulation is expensive. You need a lot of tech, you need a lot of infrastructure, you need tech professionals, and there's a huge time lag between you and other countries in development of your AI softwares. Why is that? Because you have to pass to checks if your AI is secure, which is extremely hard to do insofar AI can run through millions of combinations, and you can never certainly say that those combinations are safe, which means that even if they're true that we're just slightly regulating them, we still win because this slight regulation is for small countries, but also big countries who also have tech industries, expensive and lengthy, which gives other companies on the market like a comparative advantage over them, which means that the EU companies are in comparison with other companies at a time lag, and they're losing money. Now, why are these impacts the most crucial, and how do we look out our closing? Because we proved two things. Firstly, we proved that this is economically important for small countries which are in the most dire situations. Those are countries with a large amount of debt, with a large amount of unemployed people who are currently having tech industries. But secondly, because tech industry employs so many people and also replace so many people that they don't have within their countries. For all of these reasons, opening up.
Leži bre to sranje. Kakva su... It's okay, only I will see the flag. Good. We have been talking about AI for a couple of years already. An opening government does not still have normal examples. Deep fakes, misinformation. The risks of AI are far greater. And what is important in debating is actually weighing. Even if all of the harms that opening opposition say are true and that it fucks up Croatia and other certain developing countries, we believe that the risk posed by AI and its further integration, less checks on it, are much greater, and you should prioritize it much more. But we agree on a second thing by opening opposition, that opening government doesn't prove why this specific regulation actually solves anything. They say we can regulate it, we are smart people, we will gather in the garden like Oppenheimer and Einstein, and we'll think of regulation. We will prove why this specific regulation stops the huge bias in favor of integrating AI everywhere, and that is our extension. Firstly, why is it easy for AI to spiral out of control and be integrated everywhere and be not checked and not regulated properly? Firstly, it is profit incentive. Oftentimes companies, but governments also have an incentive to integrate AI, put them everywhere at once because it's productive for them. As opening opposition explained, so there is a bias to actually integrate it much faster because it is easier for, more profitable for them. But secondly, there is a moral hazard. Oftentimes the risks of AI are smaller, are sometimes even in the long term. You don't necessarily know it is going to come true, but there is a confirmation bias on the other hand. Every time the AI worked, it works properly. Meaning there is a moral hazard, meaning that they are not, the impacts, the harms that can occur are often maybe in the long term or something like this. But thirdly, oftentimes they can use scapegoats. They can say, this was not our issue. This was supposed to be regulated, or this is something else, a human error, a human fault, and stuff like this. But fourthly, there is a fear of missing out for businesses, meaning that companies have to implement this. And look, every technology, every website has some form of AI currently, because you need to have AI in order to stay competitive, because that is what people search for. They see, AI, this is something that is cool and stuff like this. But fifthly, there is an investment bubble in AI. Everybody is investing in tech companies and all of these things, meaning that it is a self-fulfilling prophecy to an extent. Everybody wants to implement it faster and faster and stuff like this. This proves that without any regulation, it is, or even weaker regulation, there is a huge bias to implement AI. Well, firstly, use AI everywhere. Secondly, use unchecked, technology that is up and coming, wasn't necessarily tested and stuff like this, but thirdly, integrate it into your systems a lot. So it is everywhere, and when it fails one, the harms could be catastrophic. That is what we bring into this debate. So how does this actually look like? What are the examples? Oftentimes, this is even use of AI cars, AI taxis and AI transportation systems. You control metros, you control taxis like in California, San Francisco more specifically, and stuff like this. This is horrible because the consequences of a car actually crashing could be humongous. But secondly, you use AI to control huge systems. Oftentimes now, it is tested to use in airplane tower systems where you locate each airplane, stuff like this. It is currently being used there, try to use there, stuff like this. This is horrible because any mistake can result in catastrophic consequences. But oftentimes in factories, when you have a thing where you put things and then it goes transport and stuff like this, you control, different things. You control, oftentimes it can result in crashes, things can actually fall apart and stuff like this, and can result in human casualties. Oftentimes it is used to draft legal documents. There was a scandal in America where they used this to draft certain legal documents. This is horrible to happen, but it did happen because without this. Fifthly, it is often used in security measures. Oftentimes you use this to actually scan biometric signals, oftentimes like this. If you make a mistake, you collect huge, create huge problems and stuff like this. These problems can be catastrophic. Why? Because often, I will get to weighing later, but let me explain secondly, how do we actually fix this problem? Why are these specific, regulations that are outlined in the info slide able to actually solve this? First of all, we have human control for the most risky situations. If we know that the AI can make a fault, we always have a double check mechanisms that human can actually check and do all of these things. But secondly, we are more likely to know where the AI can make mistakes and actually not use it there or put more, control there and stuff like this. But thirdly, we are going to limit industries or even ban certain technology that can have catastrophic, consequences such as transportation and stuff like this. So this specific, obviously, we're not talking about AI, ChatGPT and stuff like this. Often, sure, sometimes it will spread misinformation, but these examples are weak. We're talking about much bigger use and much greater use in our society and stuff like this. This is why this is very important and stuff like this. On their side of the house, you have a huge bias to actually not put it or not check it or don't have the knowledge where it can screw up and stuff like this. So how does this actually weigh then to opening opposition's arguments that it fucks up the economic development of these countries? First of all, our impacts are much more intense. When a mistake happens, this can often result in human casualties, fires going up, transportation systems colliding, and all of these things. These impacts are much more intense and stuff like this. But secondly, it creates a domino effect. If it is more integrated on their side of the house, one mistake can be, it's harder to actually fix all of the problems. We need to stop it now, not let it integrate as much, because then it is too late to actually pull out and actually do all of these things from the start. So it is an imperative even to do it right now, stop it because the consequences can be catastrophic. Before I get to further, I'll take opening.
We allow airplanes even though they sometimes fail and kill people. You have to prove the likelihood of failure and then acknowledge that countries are similarly incentivized to protect domestic businesses when and how we figure out when does AI fail.
First of all, I'm getting into that right now. Why is it hard to regulate on their side of the house? I think opening also answers them completely. They just close their eyes and ears, but let's prove it why on their side of the house it is not like it. First of all, a lot of governments are busy passing other policies, local governments. They talk about different issues. In Serbia, we talk about Kosovo, we talk about different issues, not necessarily AI. But secondly, oftentimes this is not the most important talking point. You have social issues, you have economic issues. AI is maybe 10 down the line, maybe in America, but in a lot of other countries, it's not that the most important issues. But third of all, how do you say, you just don't have the capacity to actually do it. A lot of these governments don't have the, expertise and a lot of these things and stuff like this. What does this mean? It means that on their side of the house, even if you want to do this, you are firstly don't have an incentive because you have other problems to actually talk about. Secondly, we prove why you have an incentive to actually just pump it even more, as we proved in the first part of the speech, but thirdly, you just don't have the knowledge to actually know what's going on and stuff like this. So this proves the comparative what is not likely for any of this to happen. Not even happen regulation, but also not do it in a specifically in a good way and stuff like this. What does this prove? Even if they have, maybe one farmer has less systems to actually, I don't know, pick up tomatoes. I think you can pick up tomatoes like this, obviously. On our side of the house, the harms are much more intense and they can be much more catastrophic. I think the weighing is simple and the weighing is something that will win us this debate. Thank you.
Okay. Last time I thanked Anna. I still want to do that, but I want to thank also an important part, which is the Dutch delegation, who has been working hard, who have finally broken multiple teams, have been working hard beforehand, have been helping each other. I want to thank that a lot. Specifically, Trivium A, they ran so we could walk. Sadly, not everyone here is here. I know normally you're watching here from the stream from the hospital. I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're able to recover. And I want to thank everyone who has helped me in any way, just chatting with me, having fun, just telling me about their cases. And I hope you all had a very great Euros. Okay. I think the main problem with OO's case is that they mainly talk about economic self-determination, which is just very narrow, because I think AI regulation is about more general moral self-determination that you should have. But I also want to note that inherent to the case is these countries cannot self-regulate, and therefore they cannot have EU regulation. If that is the case, I don't know why they're able to regulate the use of AI that will be done well in their countries. Just because they prefer deregulation doesn't mean that means that they need no regulations. That means that they are basically just having a problem in their own case. So we're just going to talk about general representation. Why should people in general be able to actually able to represent their own ideas of how these regulations should look like? Note that AI risk is inherently speculative, right? We cannot predict how many jobs we can lose. That means that inherently you need to talk a couple of things about. One, who do you trust and what do you think is something that we should prioritize as research when you're making this regulation in the first place? So what is something that we need to work towards research-wise, and who can we trust when they are saying stuff? But also, how do we quantify risk? If I lose a job, what does that mean to me? Is that also my communal duty that I feel like I'm unable to, get back to society as I should? Or is it just a monetary issue? I think that the inherent problem is that risk and things comes with a price, but price is subjective, and that is the problem. Secondly, I also think there's an inherent moral aspect of AI, right? So when we're talking about the AI users in hospitals, we say they're able to use, for example, to check diagnostics and be like, you have this disease. But when that is wrong,
That means you are now having a AI who has, like, AI making this mistake. Would we much rather have a human make a mistake, make this a human process? Is this something where you have, yes, you are accountable? I think that is easier for me. I think there's a better way for me to deal with this risk than have some machine. Who should I sue? What does this mean for me? Do I much rather have a communication with the doctor than maybe via this AI? I think this is already better than opening opposition, because they just talk about maybe sometimes you want economy. There is just more to life than economy. There is an inherent part of life that you need to talk about. Now, about the capacity to resolve. I want to note, OO just says, but we need to have so much power and we need to have so much control to regulate. I think the problem is they're talking about niche cases in which you need to ban, and I think that this is something that kind of like is also the problem that OG says, which is, you need to all have the capacity to regulate. Why do we have this? Know that AI companies work internationally, and they need to adapt to different countries. That means that in Asian states, you have different priorities on like privacy versus communal usage, so therefore they already have different things that you can do compared than the US. The US is more deregulated in some departments, but also wants to protect their own tech giants. So the kind of things that you can use already is different. That means already you need to be flexible. You already need to be flexible as a company. You already have the possibility to adapt. You want to enter the EU market because it has a lot of money. It has a lot of smart people. It has a lot of these things. So you still are able to adapt. But they also want to note, right? They say you're going to move to all these different EU countries. Why is that the stupidest thing to do as a company? Firstly, note, it is just super expensive to move headquarters, move all these people, all those change, and it's also uncertain, right? Because now you have moved, and now they make new regulation, and now you're fucked because now you need to move again. There's a huge amount of uncertainty in that. But also, note that there's just a problem where you have things such like new taxes that you need to take care of. You have new like bureaucracy that you need to take care of. There's going to take a lot of time. It is just easier to adapt and make these kinds of changes, right? Because what are these changes? Directly responding to CO. CG's case is generic because you can just make AI and just says any form of tech. Why can countries then still actually deal with this? Firstly, note that this looks like self-usage, right? So you can say, if you use AI, have a person near it and check it. That is not hard regulation panel. That is just saying you should engage it with a specific way. And this is inherent, right? Because it's about the usage of AI. You can talk about, how do we do data analysis? How do we all of this stuff? The problem is AI inherently has a random component to it. Inherently, it's basically saying, oh, we get a lot of data, we get a lot of feedback. We're going to change the ways that we're going to check, for example, if this is a right answer or not. So it's really hard to regulate inherently. But what you can easily regulate is just stuff about how do you use it. As a person, if you have a self-driving car, do you just need to stay around the wheel and need to touch it? Or do you be able to fall asleep in the seat? Those are the things that you can talk about. I think that's just really easy to kind of do and all that kind of stuff. But I also want to note, right? I think that the problem is just the other stuff where they say like, you have lobbying on a local level, and that means you cannot put any regulation. They themselves say there are huge narratives of risk around this, right? And politicians need to make the decision. Yes, I can take this lobby money, but it will piss off when I don't regulate it because people really care about it and really are risk for it. That is why they can do stuff like lobbying for things that aren't actually that important or not within the media. That is why you can still have the capacity to regulate. Why is this already better? I think this is better because this is about more cases than opening opposition is talking about, and therefore we're already better in explaining why you have the capacity as a state in general to make this regulation, and I think that's already better. Sure.
This is not enough to say that you prove capacity. You have to say why the resources are there, why the incentives are there, other than just people are scared of it. That happens on both sides. How do you have resources?
So what resources do you need? Like, if AI is inherently random, you cannot just say all this stuff where you say, you have smart people and then you can solve AI problems. Because again, that's not how the system works. If it's about implementation, we implement technology all the time. We have regulation for it. You never actually explain what is so hard. You just use a couple of buzzwords. Why is it then necessary that the EU is less representative? I think inherently, intuitively, less people vote for the EU because it's just inherently more far away. You engage with it less, there's more of a national identity you have. But also this is just a fact that people know as the average informed newspaper reader. Secondly, there's a lack of adaptability. OO says this, right? They say EU is slow, but they never actually map it. What are the mechanisms for slowness within the EU? Firstly, all the countries need to vote and agree on it. Greece has indeed a different context than Germany, so you need to have everyone be able to talk about this. But also, all the commissions OG are talking about, is this within their jurisdiction? Which experts should we hire? We make sure that we have a representation so that all the experts are there. We need to make double sure that it is not in contradiction with other charters and things that we have. Therefore, it's inherently less adaptable. But I also want to note, there's just less accountability for the EU. At the moment that you as an individual are having a person that you can vote on, this is just inherently easier with a government that is near you, right? You can protest your government. You have more media attention on your specific country that is more easily digestible because it's not in different languages, because it's not talking about this like EU bureaucratic things where you don't understand who is responsible for what part. What is the commission? What is the parliament? If I protest, what should I protest for and against, and who should I call? It is significantly easier to do that at the moment it is your country. Again, I think this is significantly easier to do. Okay, now, how do we then weigh this? I just think overall, as an individual, you should have self-determination because you're more dependent on yourself, and we already allow it. We allow people to do risky things such as bungee jumping because we allow them to say, you can determine that for yourself. Even if there might be a bad choice for you, we allow them to make that choice. They can more make that choice on this more moral and subjective stuff on the arts of the house. For all those reasons, CO.
Okay, on CO, risk is speculative. Everything is speculative to some degree, but we can still determine what is riskier. If something can kill someone, it is probably riskier than something that cannot. If something is not researched enough, it is probably riskier. If it can injure you, it is riskier. It is not perfect, but we can still do it. I think it's completely uncharitable to just take about it. If we would took that look, we would not do anything. The second thing is, they want the people to be able to determine for themselves. First of all, notice that it is kind of, the same thing. Why is the border your country and not the European Union? There is always some border that you have to do it. But second of all, they don't prove why there is different things that people want in different countries. I think that people in all countries want this to be safe, but the companies are making it unsafe. All of these people that want it safe, we're just proving that on our side of the house, it is much more likely that all of these people get safeness. What they say is that, on our side of the house, it is, worse for EU for two reasons. Why? Less people vote for EU. There are hundreds of ways in which EU restricts these countries' autonomies. I don't know why this is important. This is also for the OO. Like, they determine your economics, your borders, your immigration, your everything. And now for the AI, which is completely distinct from the people, which has nothing to do with their identity, they're restricting our companies. It's important. It is completely uncomparative. Don't know why it's the tipping point. And then, the EU is slow because all of them needs to vote. Like in parliaments, also all people need to vote. I don't know what the heck this is, but oftentimes EU has much more pressure to actually do this. EU is the one who is actually showing to the world we have effective regulations. We are actually doing this in a good way. The comparative is on their side of the table. You have governments who have populist thing to say, who have other things, who have religion, who have abortion versus not abortion, and all of that stuff. It becomes unimportant in all of this politics to actually say, people are gonna protest. They have 100 other things more important in the country. But even if they protest, then there are protests on our side of the house because the government is not, implementing EU in the best way. So in the best scenario, it is non-comparative. More likely, it is comparative to our side. What does the O say and why they fail? Panel notice, I cannot teach you how to drive a bike while playing the football. Schneider cannot prove to you why this is good for, individual AIs by talking about economics. Economics is something that is likely to differ in multiple countries. Fiscal policy is likely to be different in multiple countries. There is no analysis, look at your phone, no analysis. Why is it likely that different countries will need different AI regulations? They say, some tech startup. First of all, tech startups exist in all countries, but second of all, those tech startups probably have the same tech, the same AI. No analysis on this. Why is it likely that they will have this probably same thing that is dispersed throughout the EU? First of all, there is nothing that is, country-wise specific that induces specific type of AI, and you usually don't have that much types of AI. Second of all, it is just so much easily proliferating throughout the world. You have so much, speeding and of development means that it is unlikely to, even if there is some slight difference now, to have it in the future. Thirdly, often it's not that you have startup, it's just that often the big companies from big country come to small companies and use their workforce to do the same thing. Meaning there is no reasoning to actually have something specific. I know that weather is probably different in Greece and Scotland. I don't think there is any reasons to have different AI here and in Scotland. And just think about it. The most likely scenario is not that you have determining for Poland is this way and then for this is this way. How this is realistic to be is for you to have strict written rules when something is dangerous. This is when you have that it's used in this part of the world. When it's used in the surgeries, it's risky. When it's used in airplanes, it is risky. I don't know why this is good for Germany and not good for Croatia. There is no analysis of this. I think it is completely unlikely. Okay, no. What is our case and why? Okay, actually, yes.
Countries regulated cars, planes, and every new tech until they became safe enough to use. Tech business can be found online by any nerd that does AI. You can easily outsource it to anyone in the world. Every country will find money to do it. If it does kill people, you don't even prove why anybody would sell AI cars.
Yes, we have. Okay, why is it likely to be risky, which they ask, and why is it likely to not be regulated? This is really important. First of all, just a second. Why is it likely to, first of all, be risky? I'll get to the second one later. First of all, it is unknown and new. These are new technology that didn't exist, literally 5 years ago. Second of all, this is hard to understand. Often these are black boxes. General intelligence, you do not have the formulas, that you don't have knowledge of how they actually work. Thirdly, they're just usually rushed to be soon in the market, meaning they're not tested enough. They do not have, so much regulation about it. I just think this is similar to actually having just, risky drug. On our side of the house, what we're saying is, and this is really important, in most cases, it is not the banning. It is just having more testing, be it more rigorous. On our side of the house, you actually have the drug that is just more tested until it is safe to use. On their side of the house, you're just putting it into the market. I can't take it. Okay, why is it likely to not be regulated on their side of the house? Notice that on their side of the house, you oftentimes have incompetent governments or governments that do not care about these kind of things. Why is it so? As I said, usually a lot of these countries drive on nationalism and some kind of these kind of things. They're a much more important issue that needs to be in the public eye. Notice that on our side of the house, we don't have to prove that this is important for the EU because it is in the motion that it will be implemented. They have to prove that it is something that's going to be implemented. They're saying, it's killing people. Oftentimes, it's just not that likely to happen. We're just saying you cannot go to election and say, this AI will kill people. Nobody knows about it. There is no pressure to actually do it. But when it happens, it just makes horrible consequences. Why do we win and why is it so bad? First of all, there are two problems with our opening. The first thing is the examples and the extent of the impact. And second is the no analysis as to what they're actually solving. When we tell you, you have more experts, more scrutiny, more testing and all these things, this is how we solve it. But we actually tell you what are the worst things that actually happen. This literally means killing people in cars. This literally means, bad robots in surgery that are not tested enough to actually do this. This literally means people getting killed. That is the best impact this debate. We think it should win because it means saving lives.
Semifinals, EUDC as a whole. Here.
Okay. Before I start, with my best friend, we have a tradition that when we are drinking shots, the second is always to Poland. This is the second out round. It is to Poland. Rozkład jazdy? I prefer non-verbal POIs. Thank you. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. Nobody in this debate really talks about AI. They are talking just about some technology without specifying what is linked to AI and why is this actually a crucial decision. This is not the debate whether EU should regulate things or not. We consented that the EU is regulating things. This is the debate about what we are going to do with this particular issue. And now I'm going to explain to you why AI is something so unique and something that EU doesn't have legitimization and in principle shouldn't make decision about it. This is a crucial moment in the time. This is the first time when the AI is actually influences lives and it goes out of random labs, it goes out of just like random science fiction speculation. It is actually influencing how our world is going to function in a couple of years. And that is the change that as a humanity we've never experienced. Right now, we are creating the other, let's say, subjects, I don't know better word, that can replace us is something that is uniquely linked to human before, which is the thinking process, which is making decision, which is creating, which is making relationships, which is like making new information, producing new information. To this time in the history, humans were responsible for all the information existing. Right now, we are drastically changing it. The world was changing for the whole time in the history, but we're always the only one in the capacity of crafting it, and we're a unique subject that was in reality in capacity to do stuff and to react how the world is looking right now. Okay, and like this thing that humans were the only one in the position of thinking and making all of this decision and taking any accountability is the foundation of all of our moral system, of how we are perceiving the world, how we are perceiving the place of human in this whole system and so on. It doesn't mean though that this is bad that we're creating a new subject. With being a human comes both like greatness and the cursed limitations. That means, and this is the risk that we're talking about in this debate, it doesn't mean that this is something necessarily wrong, but this is something that we should have the capacity to decide whether we want to take this risk and whether we want to change, to what extent we want to allow this technology to actually influence how we are perceiving the world and how we are actually existing in like all of this stuff. And now, why AI and this risk is something that we cannot actually AI is so new that the unpredictability is super high. We do have no past research. It is very quickly changing and so on. Therefore, we cannot therefore, this is huge burden to let somebody else make the decision for us. If something is so uncertain, that means that the EU politicians doesn't know all of these things. This means that they cannot predict whether this is good decisions for us or not. But this is also something that we shouldn't let them decide for us because we might principally don't agree. When we're prepping to this Euros, we're debating at Rotterdam Open the motion about AI, and from this motion, I'm thinking at least once a week, who am I if the AI can replace replace me, and if the AI can actually make thoughts, emotions, and so on, and this is something that is fucking scary. I don't want EU to make regulations about it. I don't want random politicians who are the worst competent politicians, but that, I will go to that later, to make decisions about that. And that is why we're thinking that right now we're going over our opening. Our opening is only talking about econ and about, oh, we want to make more money. You know what? What is the purpose of making laws, and what is the purpose of making any regulations? Laws are representing the values of people, and they are shaping the society. We are letting other people do stuff for us to have the society that actually works in the systems and in the bonds that we are agreeing on. And about right now the consent and buying to the EU. Consent has two important characteristics. I've learned that from equity. Firstly, it needs to be informed. Secondly, it needs to be reversible. That is the consent that we've never established. When we were entering the EU, we agreed that ecology is important. We agreed that democracy is important. We've never agreed if we want to be any the single thinking entity in the world or not. We didn't agree to what extent we are agreeing to be replaced. You weren't taking Piotr's POIs, la la la. Okay, so we think that only on our side we're actually linking this to this democratic principle and to why it doesn't apply in this particular situation. We agreed on the econ stuff, so OO is not proving this particular link. Their principle is, okay. Now going to the governments, starting with CG. OO asked CG if they have something smart to say. They said nothing, and then bring examples extension. So engagement is going to be synergetic to both of the teams because examples extension, bro, be better. This debate is not debate regulation or not regulation. This is something that it seems to be because OO got detached from the debate, but it's the regulation on both sides. And right now, OJ is talking, okay, EU has greater capacity and countries doesn't have incentive resources and capacity. Why we actually have all of that? Okay, firstly, why EU doesn't have great capacity. They brought you 5 reasons for that. First, legislative body with key leaders. Bro, wake up. Politicians are going to the political retirement to the European Union. Nobody actually cares about them. They are the less competent people. Competent people are staying within the policies of their countries because then they have much more influence on how the things actually working and so on. So that was the first. Secondly, they had good synergy. What does it mean and why is that something that is making our capacity greater? Buzzword. Greater size. It's actually working on the other side. If you have more people, if you have more of the countries, it is harder for you to make decisions. The decisions are super slow and so on. And then they talked about buying and opt-out. I've already explained why is that not applying to this debate and why is that actually on our side of the house? And both of these reasons were the same. They are just baiting you into having fight. And now, why countries have incentives and so on? Countries, voters do care about this. This is something very crucial for people. Voters are going to vote for politicians who are going to do good regulations. But secondly, if the harms are so big as the CG is claiming, a whole system's not working, then politicians want their country to be stable. They are going to implement all of these regulations. We think that on our side, we are more efficient in doing that, but we are doing that in a way that is not harming the whole morality. Thanks.